Hi, I'm Dr. J, and welcome to 5-Minute Fridays. I have a background of a master's in human performance and applied sports science and a doctorate in sport and performance psychology. This week, we're going to be covering hypertrophy. Please like, comment, share, subscribe for more 5-Minute Fridays with your Dr. J. So let's get into it. Let's start out by defining what is hypertrophy, and let's finish by talking about how does that occur and how does that benefit us, all right? So before we get deeper into hypertrophy, I wanted to take a moment to look at how do our muscles work so that we understand how hypertrophy affects us performance-wise, right? So our muscles are made up of two different types of filaments. We have the actin filament here, which is kind of like a chain of small balls that are strung together, kind of like a garland of a Christmas tree. And then our myosin filaments, which are shaped kind of like golf clubs, drivers to be specific, and they are strung together, and the heads of those golf clubs, so to speak, or the myosin filaments, stick out. And when our muscle is activated through voluntary muscle contraction, the actin filaments stay put, but the myosin heads are actually attracted to the actin filament here, and they'll attach at these sites here where you see the nodes, and it'll bring the muscle together, causing it to contract. And those contractions and that coming together of the actin and the myosin filaments is called a cross bridge. And so whenever we contract our muscles, there's a series of cross-bridge connections that are happening, sent from signals from our nervous system for that to happen, right? And this is a very simple overview, but it gives us a perspective that we need to understand why hypertrophy is important. So within our muscle, we have strings and lots of these actin and myosin filaments. And myosin plus actin, I put it down here so I would remember to tell you, makes muscle fibers, okay? These are also called myofibrils, and our muscles are actually collections of myofibrils, and they're stacked together and bundled together to make the belly of our muscles. So if we look at this and say this is a bicep muscle, for example, so we got our strong bicep here, right? When we contract, these filaments are coming together and making a tight bond, right? And so if we were to take a slice of this muscle and we put it flat here, so I slice it vertically, we'd have what is called a muscle cross-section. And within this cross-section, you're going to see that we have all these myofibrils that make up the belly of the muscle. The more myofibrils that we have, the more opportunity we're going to have for these cross-bridge connections to happen. And the more cross-bridge connections that can happen means there's a chance for greater force, right? And greater force production from that same muscle. So then as we're working on building our muscle and we're able to increase this muscle cross-sectional area, that means, right, a greater chance for muscle force and contraction. But in addition to that, if we have more myofibrils and more muscle in general to work with, our strength endurance is actually going to go up. So that increases our hardiness of our activities. So not only will you be able to do something really strong once, you might be able to do it again, or you might be able to do it multiple times throughout a single competition. And so by working our muscles and building this hypertrophy, more specifically athletic hypertrophy versus a bodybuilding hypertrophy, we're able to move more with better quality, better force, and more consistent force overall, which means we'll be able to play the game longer at higher intensity, which is a win on all aspects, because the longer we're able to stay in the game, the more we can affect the game and the more we can create positive change. So then when our goal is to target more hypertrophy within our training system or within our training year, the types of training that are going to get us there is going to be heavier weights, all right, where we're looking at that higher percentage within our 1 rep max or our 1 RM, or doing slower movements. So those movements where we're loading the eccentric side of things, right? So if you're lowering something, you might be lowering it on a tempo, right? We're forcing that muscle to adapt and to work under harder conditions for it to grow, right? We're trying to build ourselves by changing the aspects of strength that we're asking for from our body. All right, so those would be two styles that would help us. This is conditional, so to speak, so it does depend on a few factors, which we'll get to a little bit later. So that hypertrophy range is going to be approximately 3 to 6 rounds, and that could be about 10 to 20 reps, right? But then from our intensity aspect, to speak specifically about our 1 RM, if we're working within that medium to high volume, it's going to be about 50 to 75% of your 1 RM. And if we're using perception as a guide versus a 1 rep maximum for that activity, it'd be about a 5 to 7.5 out of a 10 scale, right? 10 being the hardest and 1 being the easiest. So a few of the factors that weigh into our ability to get hypertrophy or that affect the extent of the hypertrophy that we're able to attain would be our training status, all right? So how long have you been training? What kind of shape are you in as you're beginning this style of training? What is your training age? how long have you been training? So not necessarily within a week or within a singular day, but how long have you been training very intentfully and very specifically for the benefits that you're looking, right? Versus your chronological age. And that does affect the amount of adaptations that you're gonna get or the extent of those adaptations within that same time period. So you're gonna see people who are younger in training age take on those adaptations very quickly and very early on in training, where those of us that have a little bit more training under our belt or a little bit more experience in these areas, that effect might just take just a little bit longer, but it doesn't mean that we're not getting those adaptations. It's just not as readily seen as those who are younger training age-wise, all right? And I wanna make a clear distinction between training age and chronological age, right? Chronological age is the year that you're born from the day that you're born, and each year you're 1 year older, versus training age is from when you started training very intentfully, right? And I use the word intentfully because there are different levels of training, but our focus, our purpose, and our aim with that training matters most. So now that we have an idea of how hypertrophy occurs and the kinds of rep ranges, aka volume, or even the intensity, which would be the type of weight or the perceived weight that we're lifting, let's look at the things that also affect that, right? So our nutrition is gonna either help or inhibit our growth in this area, right? So if we're not able to rest, regenerate, and refuel our muscles, it's gonna be hard to grow our muscles, right? We need to give our body something to work with. You wouldn't expect a car to go far with an empty tank, right? And hypertrophy is gonna be one of those higher intensity trainings where you will be burning a lot of substrate, all right? The things that go into our muscle to help our body run more efficiently. And you're gonna need to be replacing that. Our muscles run on glycogen, and we touched on it a little bit with our hydration series, right? But that glycogen is that fuel source for our muscle. So if we're not giving the fuel source to our muscle that our muscles need, it's gonna make this journey much tougher on us growing the muscle. All right. Another consideration would be the type of training that you're doing in addition to weightlifting specifically, right? If we're running a lot of miles, that might not be conducive to us gaining a lot of mass, but there's a balance in between there, and you might see adaptations happen in your running, for example, right? And so when we're looking at it from an athletic standpoint, there's going to be multiple factors that will either inhibit or grow and encourage these things to happen, right? And we've already mentioned our training age, our chronological age, and our training status. So then before we close, let's run over the benefits of hypertrophy, right? So we said increased strength capacity, increased strength endurance, right? And then on top of it, aesthetically, you're gonna look stronger. So you're gonna feel better about it, right? Your body awareness is gonna increase because you've spent more time training and working with your body, right? It's hard to be more aware and more in your body unless we're spending time working with and on our body, right? And then increased metabolism as well, because this facet of training is a high energy demand. You might be tight, you might be sore from this style of training, but it's going to lead to later gains down the road. All right. And if you want more specific advice on how to fit this into your training to make you a better athlete, to make you a better performer, feel free to reach out. Thank you again for joining us on this 5-Minute Friday about hypertrophy. Please join us next week as we go over error correction and handling performance errors. Once again, this has been Dr. J, and as always, be refined by the grind.